Welcome to the Church History Library's Men and Women of Faith lecture series. Tonight's lecture is entitled Mary Fielding Smith, Daughter, Woman of Faith, Mother, and our presenter is Audrey M. Godfrey. My name is Deborah Xavier, and I'm the Marketing Communications Specialist for the Church History Department. Audrey M. Godfrey grew up in North Ogden, Utah, on a fruit farm with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. She remembers writing at an early age, usually under the trees of a nearby orchard. She is a graduate of Weber College and Utah State University with degrees in English and history. Married to Kenneth W. Godfrey, they have 4 outstanding boys and 1 amazing daughter, and 18 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I bet they're outstanding and amazing also. Her published writings include subjects such as the arrival of the sewing machine in Utah, the settlement of the Muddy Mission through the eyes of a woman, how Utah celebrated statehood, and a thesis on the social life of Camp Floyd near Fairfield, Utah. Welcome, Audrey.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to share some research that I've been doing for 3 months now, and my husband's going to be glad that I'm over with it. But it's been very interesting. And so I'll plunge in. Her life shortened by hard work and illness, Mary Fielding Smith, widow of Hiram Smith, spent her final days in the care of Heber C. Kimball's family, trying to recover from pneumonia. She became ill at a public function, and wishing to spare her children from her illness, she sought Heber's help, whom she had been sealed to for time on January 15, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple. Mary had lived a full, sometimes difficult, but faith-filled life, which began in the English village of Hanadon, where her father, John Fielding, a tenant farmer, also preached the gospel of Methodism, and his wife, Rachel Fielding, led the prayers of the local women. The family formerly lived in Halifax, Yorkshire, England, but moved to the property of a relative to take care of it. Mary was the 6th child in a family of 10 children, 6 boys and 3 girls. Their mother, Rachel, John's second wife, was well educated but not of a mind to live in the country. Mary's older sister Anne recalled that Rachel was overwhelmed with rural life, but put her mind to making the best of her circumstances and became an excellent farm wife. Mary received a formal education, probably from her mother, who taught her literature, art, and music. She also trained Mary in the basics of homemaking. Mary earned her own way in her 20s and 30s and learned how to manage her money. This experience later assisted her in America. Her siblings, Mercy and Joseph, immigrated to Canada in March 1832. Mary wrote to them that the family situation in England had deteriorated. The dealings of the Almighty toward us as a family have indeed been very mysterious. I have at times been led to doubt whether his hand can have been in all the changes that has taken place. Mary hoped to join her siblings, but had been unable thus far to find the means to do so. As a young lady, Mary received proposals of marriage, but refused and remained single. Finally, finding the means to emigrate, she joined her siblings in 1834. After her arrival, the Fieldings attended a meeting where Parley P. Pratt preached on new revelation and the restoration of the gospel. The Fieldings believed his message and were baptized in a stream called Black Creek. Of the occasion, Pratt wrote, "We baptized Brother Joseph Fielding and his 2 amiable and intelligent sisters, for such they proved to be." While in Canada, Mercy fell in love with another convert, Robert Blasiel Thompson, who later became a close friend and personal secretary to the prophet. Following their marriage on June 4, 1837, the newlyweds and Joseph and Mary desired to gather with the saints in Kirtland. Upon the sisters' arrival there, they were described as those lovely English girls. Of Mary, she was beautiful to look upon, and of them both, they were trim, straight, dark-haired, and dark-eyed, with delicate blooming cheeks and finely molded, graceful figures, clad in dainty silks of modern grace. They were the observed of the observers. Their refined and stately ways made them a shining mark in Kirtland society. Robert and Mercy were subsequently called back to Canada on a mission, and Joseph responded to a call to preach in England, thus leaving Mary alone. Mary found friendship and board with the late Kimball, wife of Heber C. Kimball, who was also serving a mission in England, and they became lifelong friends. Mary later referred to Sister Kimball as a Christian old friend who gave her counsel and treated her as she would a sister. Occasionally, the two ate dinner with Joseph and Emma Smith and other church leaders and women, who also became their friends. Through this association, she developed a firm belief in the prophet's leadership. To support herself, in the fall of 1837, she wrote, "I live next house to Brother Humphrey. They are hourly expecting an increase of family. I teach little Maria to read." It was usual that while she was employed as a caregiver to children, she made time to do needlework for the mother. She also visited friends as an act of kindness, where in turn she was made as comfortable as I can be out of a home of my own. During the summer and fall of 1837, Mary experienced many trials and hardships, as well as anxiety and loneliness. She missed her sister. There was apostasy in Kirtland, and she became nostalgic for her life in England. In a letter to Mercy and Robert, she warned them that if they planned to return to Kirtland in the fall of 1837, they might want to reconsider. There was apostasy and upheaval in the church, as well as a lack of jobs, and her own work would end soon. Mary relied on the scriptures to find solace. She took comfort in the Psalms as a girl and later received courage and support in them. Letters also became a way to communicate with her loved ones, and without these letters, some of her history would be lost. Her letters are filled with the proceedings of church meetings. She, in essence, took minutes of the proceedings and declared over and over her religious fervor. When others wanted to know what was preached, they came to Mary, who would check her notes. For instance, after a meeting in the temple where Parley P. Pratt spoke out against church leaders, her meticulous reporting of apostasy caused Orson Pratt, Parley's brother, and Warren Parrish to come with pen and paper and took down all the particulars from my mouth, as they had heard so many reports and wanted to know the truth. So that says something about her recording of it. This was an era of letter writing. In her study of correspondence in America, an honors student stated that people of this period relied on letters to not only communicate with each other, but to conduct business. So important were letters that some individuals bought books that taught them the rules and guidelines of proper correspondence. But it is clear that Mary needed no help with her letters. They were lengthy, full of news and expressions of her faith. At age 36, with no possibilities for marriage and someone to provide for her, Mary found a teaching school for a month. After this employment ended, the Dort family, relatives of Joseph and Hiram Smith on their mother's side, hired her to take care of their children who had attended her school. The recompense of board and an unnamed amount of money would help her with her expenses. So far, she had managed rather well without her sister and brother to give her familial support. But things were about to change her life drastically. After a special conference in 1837, harmony prevailed again in Kirtland, so the prophet determined church leaders should visit the saints in far west Missouri. His brother Hiram's wife, Jerusha, was near confinement, But the prophet urged Hiram to accompany him and other leaders to Missouri. Hiram felt uneasy in doing so and asked his brother Don Carlos to watch over the family. The group arrived at their destination on October 30th, 1837. However, soon after, Hiram received word via a letter from another brother, Samuel, that Jerusha had passed away. Samuel wrote, "She died this evening about 9:30. She was delivered of a daughter on the 7th or 8th of the month. She has been low ever since. I called the family together. Jerusha told the children to tell their father that the Lord had taken their mother and left them for you to take care of." In an accompanying note, Don Carlos assured him that he would look after the children until his return. Hiram was distraught and left for home immediately. The slowness of his return journey must have seemed endless. His concern for his children, a sense of the loss of a companion who had been his first love, his helpmeet, and his strength for many years, no doubt filled his thoughts. What was he to do? His responsibility to assist Joseph caused him to wonder how he could continue to serve. Concerned for Hiram, Joseph quickly followed him back to Kirtland to give him counsel and comfort. He told him to marry immediately to give his children a mother and to free him to continue his church duties. He suggested a friend, Mary Fielding. After some thought, Hiram asked Mary to be his wife, and I'm condensing this. There's been time in between here. Mary was not unaware of Hiram. She described the Smith family seated in the upper stand. "Joseph and Hiram I know best and love much." She often mentioned him in her letters as she observed him in meetings where he wept at times. After hearing him speak, she once said, "He reminded me of some of the Nephite preachers of old, when he assured us with great energy that from that hour the church should begin to rise." Still, Mary must have been uneasy to take on the responsibility of being a stepmother. In a letter discussing marriage written while she was still in England, she declared, "It is a strong impression made upon my mind by the advice of my dear parent never to enter into the important and responsible situation of stepmother." However, she also recalled the words of her patriarchal blessing given by Joseph Smith Sr. after she arrived in Kirtland. He told her, "Thou shalt have all the righteous desires of thy heart. The Lord is willing that thou shouldst have a companion in life, a man after thine own heart. Thy children shall be blessed of the Lord." And so, with some reluctance, she told Hiram, "I will set a proxy for your wife that is dead, and I will be sealed to you for eternity myself, for I never had any other husband. I love you, and I do not want to be separated from you, nor be forever alone in the world to come." They were married on December 24th, 1837. And what of Hiram? With Jerusha only a few weeks dead and still mourning her, he stated, "It was not because I had any less love or regard for Jerusha that I married so soon, but it was for the sake of my children." He needed a wife who was religious, a faithful church member, and one who could teach his children as she had taught others. And here was Mary, who had lived the single life for many years, agreeing to instant motherhood. Luckily, Hannah Grinnells, who Hiram and Jerusha had employed to help in the home, would continue to stay. Mary would also have to learn to live with extended members of the household. Hiram had a propensity for taking in those in need. So additional inhabitants of the home were George Mills, a blind former soldier, Margaret Bryson, and a young woman, Jane Wilson, who was plagued with fits. Mary certainly had her hands full, but she would find how helpful these adults would be. First, she must learn to be a mother to sad, mourning children who miss their mother. Mary found motherhood much different from caring for other people's children. One can imagine those first days and months of adjustment. Of the children, only Lavina was old enough to help her much. with the household, but Mary taught the children tasks they could perform and expected them to help her. In 1838, pregnant with their first child, Hiram and Mary moved with other church members, including Mercy and Robert, to Far West, Missouri in early March. Though still weak, Mary set to work making the family's almost completed new home comfortable for them. Here there would only be her touch in arranging the furniture and managing the household. Hiram spent a great deal of time visiting the saints in various settlements in the state. Mary enjoyed the several months of caring for the family and her home, but difficulties with the Missourians arose and life became more worrisome. By October 30th, with Mary due to deliver soon and members of the family ill, Missouri militiamen came for Hiram. He pleaded with them to allow him to stay and care for his loved ones, but not caring about anything but arresting Hiram, they did so. For the next 5.5 months, Hiram suffered in jail. Mary was delivered of their first child on November 13, 1838, with the help of Phoebe Angel, known as Mother Angel, because of her service as a midwife and nurse. Hiram's father sent word to his son that the baby was born and asked what name should be given. Hiram responded that at 8 days old the child should be blessed and given the name of Joseph after his brother, and Fielding after Mary's brother Joseph. Mary, still too weak from birth, asked Hannah Grinnells to dress the baby and place him in the arms of his grandfather to receive his blessing. With Mary's continued weakness, Mercy, whose own first child was just 3 months old, fed both babies. Granny Grinnells took charge of the children, and George Mills brought in wood and helped where he could. One day, however, men came to Mary's home and trashed it as they looked for weapons. Little Joseph escaped suffocation while hidden under a pile of clothes. Mary and Hannah, the children, and Mary's sister Mercy were terrified by the invasion. Misunderstanding her failure to write, in despair, Hiram wrote that even if she had no feelings for him as a husband, she could have sent some information concerning the little babe and the children that lay near his heart. Later, he wrote again and said if she had decided to forsake him, she should send word. Mary calmed his fears. She told him she could not bear the thought of his having any suspicion that he must be unacquainted with the principles of her heart. Should I forsake a bosom friend in the time of adversity and affliction, when all the sympathy and affection I am capable of feeling is called for to soothe and comfort? Finally, when little Joseph was 11 weeks old, Mary and the baby were placed in a wagon with quilts to warm them and traveled to Carthage jail. Both Mercy and Don Carlos accompanied them. Many years later, Mercy remembered the difficult journey. The weather was extremely cold. We suffered much of the journey. We arrived at the prison in the evening. We were admitted and the doors closed upon us. The few hours together dispelled both Mary and Hiram's concerns for each other and solidified their relationship as they looked upon their firstborn child together. While Mary and Mercy visited the jail, an evacuation from Missouri began. Mercy recalled, "Shortly after our return to Far West, we had to leave our cold, unfinished house and start in lumber wagons for Illinois. My sister again being placed on a bed in an afflicted state. This was about the middle of February, the weather extremely cold. I had still the care of both babies. Evidently, the whole Smith family traveled together in whatever conveyances they could find. Ruts and chuck holes bounced the occupants about as they traveled over the prairie toward Illinois. Mercy, too, did not have the benefit of a husband to help, as Robert had fled with other brethren into the wilderness to escape capture. As they reached Quincy, Illinois, Don Carlos took charge. We are trying to get a house and to get the family together. We shall do the best we can for them, and that which we consider to be most in accordance with Hiram's feelings." However, kind friends took Mary in and provided for her. She received good, nourishing food and peaceful sleep uninterrupted by dreams of the terror she had experienced in Far West. A week later, Don Carlos wrote to his brothers in jail. Hiram's children and Mother Grinnell's are living at present with Father. They are all well. Mary has not got her health yet, but I think it increases slowly. Another missive from Edward Partridge concurred. Brother Hiram's wife lives not far from me. I have been to see her a number of times. Her health was very poor when she arrived, but she has been getting better. Hiram again hoped for a letter from Mary. She wrote several times expressing her love for him, which either weren't delivered or they were returned to her. He wrote her twice more, pleading for word from her. In despair, she tried again. My dear husband, I must beg you not to say no more about my having forsaken you. I again reassure you that such a thought never entered my heart. Don't, my dear, be uneasy about any of the children. They shall continue to receive all the care and attention I am capable of showing them until your return, and afterward it shall not be lessened. But this letter was sent back also while she was on her way to Nauvoo. Finally, settled in with Hiram, Mary's health recovered, giving her the energy to create a home that suited her and Hiram and the family's needs. In a letter to her brother Joseph, she recalled, I feel but little concerned about where I am if I can but keep my mind stayed upon God. For you know, in this there is perfect peace. I believe the Lord is overruling all things for good. They moved into the upper floor of the stone house near the boat landing, then to a home on the bluff in 1840. After unpacking their possessions, the business of homemaking filled her days and nights. On May 14, 1841, another daughter was added to the family and named Martha Ann. Mary taught the children to work and accomplish skills they would need. Martha Ann later remembered that as a child, her mother would measure off so much yarn that she had to knit before she could have her supper. She also learned to spin, and by the time she was 13 years old, she could spin 4 skeins of yarn a day. Mary most likely also taught the girls to knit, to sew, and create clothing and needed items for the home, and to churn, cook, and keep the house clean, all things they would need to know in their own homes. The family read the scriptures together, Hiram providing copies of the Book of Mormon for the children. When they visited him in Liberty Jail, he gave Mary some copies of the Book of Mormon there for the children. And then later, in a letter, he wrote to Lavina, be strong, search your book. You must try to read it through. You may have my small Book of Mormon. Pray for your father, and the Lord help him to come home. Joseph recalled his mother taught them to pray, and that all the children grew up faithful to the church. Martha Ann remembered her father as a loving, kind, affectionate father who indulged his children. He was seldom cheerful, but one day Mary made him a pair of pants of which he was very proud. Martha Ann said, I saw him walk back and forth with his hands in his pockets, obviously happy with his new clothes. In 1841, Mercy's husband, Robert Thompson, died. 2 years later, the prophet told her she should not stay single and lonely, and this was precipitated by Robert appearing to him with such power that it made him tremble. So Joseph sealed Mercy to Hiram for time and suggested that Hiram build a room onto his house for her, which he did, and there she remained with her daughter as his wife until he died. Even 5 years into their marriage, Mary struggled with her husband's perception of her as a stepmother. Called as church patriarch and holding other positions, Hiram sometimes spent months away from the family on church assignments. In a letter in March 1842, Mary wrote to him about farm-related concerns and business dealings she thought that Hiram should know. She closed this portion of the letter with, I remain your faithful companion and friend, but an unhappy stepmother. Then she added several heart-rending paragraphs. I feel as though I could not close my letter without telling you how hard I feel it is to bear to have my character scandalized and published round the neighborhood as an oppressive stepmother to your children, and from your own mouth. I had supposed that you were tolerably well satisfied with me as a mother. But after taking upon myself such a task purely out of sympathy, and for so long doing everything in my power, and that conscientiously for their comfort, both in your absence and in your presence, it gives me the very worst kind of feeling to hear you say that the children have no mother. I am not conscious of ever committing one act of oppression upon one of your children since I knew them, nor do I believe that my sister ever interfered with any member of your family, although her character is now branded with mine as being such as your children could not live with. This comment may have been prompted by her difficulties with Hiram's 15-year-old daughter, Lavina, who was known to express herself loudly when something displeased her. Perhaps upset with Mary over being corrected, she told her father, who must have mentioned it to friends. Showing his commitment and love for Mary, and boy, he needed to do that after that letter. On May 29, 1843, Hiram married her for time, and she was sealed to him. This same day, Mary stood proxy as promised for Jerusha to be sealed to Hiram. As yet, the temple had not been built, and Joseph, fearing it would not be before he died, introduced the endowment to 9 men so they could officiate when the temple was finished, and so this was the way they were able to do the work. Though he had been on the city council and later served as a vice mayor, Hiram was also the assistant president of the church. Using his authority and love for Mary, Hiram gave his support when Mary and Mercy decided to collect pennies from the sisters of the church to pay for windows in the new temple arising in Nauvoo. The women of the city were aware of the significance of the temple and followed the progress of its construction, writing about it in their journals. They had participated in spiritual manifestations in the Kirtland temple, and looked forward to the same blessings again. Some sewed mittens for the laborers, others fed the men. Sarah Granger Kimball's sewing group were among the sewers, as Relief Society women know. Mary and Mercy wished to start a drive to raise money for the construction. So in December 1843, they composed a letter inviting the British sisters to participate, and the 2 continents began a sort of competition. The Bolton, England branch met regularly to raise their money, opening and closing their meetings with songs and prayer. A sum of $2,000 was eventually turned over to the temple fund. Later, the need for 200,000 shingles, nails, and glass arose, while Hiram was nursing an injured leg. He had much time to think about the earlier project, and on April 6, 1844, he spoke to the saints, saying, "I thought some time ago I would get up a small subscription so that the sisters might do something. I take the responsibility upon myself and again call upon the sisters." As before, they responded. At the April General Conference in 1844, Hiram urged the saints to accelerate the work on the temple and increase their offerings. He spoke of the proceeds raised by the penny drive and blessed the women for their contributions, saying, "You poor sisters shall have a seat in that house," meaning the temple. "I will stand on the top of the pulpit and proclaim to all what the sisters have done." As the temple arose, threats were made against the saints, specifically against the prophet and Hiram. On June 12th, the brothers were arrested for the destruction of the Expositor, an anti-Mormon newspaper. They were jailed but released under a habeas corpus order. They were arrested again on June 17 and released the same day. On June 20th, Hiram and Joseph met at daybreak on the town's outskirts to devise a plan to defend the town. Later in the day, the children most likely watched their fathers parade in full Nauvoo Legion uniform upon the banks of the Mississippi. That night, Joseph advised Hiram to take his family and leave the city, but he would not leave his brother. On June 22nd, Joseph thought if he and Hiram had left, the mobs would leave Nauvoo alone, since they were the ones that were the target of persecution. That evening, after arranging for the care of their loved ones, they proceeded to the river, stopping on the way at Hiram's home. Joseph tried to console Mary by telling her, "Mary, don't feel bad. The Lord will take care of you, and he will deliver us, but I do not know how." The brothers left, but returned later after Joseph received a letter from Emma asking him to come home. Little 5-year-old Joseph saw his father and his uncle as they came back across the water, disembarked, and walked to the house. As they entered, Joseph lifted his nephew onto his lap, while Hiram washed himself and packed some personal items. It was a time of sadness as the families realized what lay ahead. However, that evening they were able to see Lavina married to Lauren Walker and observe her happiness. During the early morning hours, Martha Ann, sick with the measles, watched her mother walk the floor. Finally, a knock came on the window, and a brother Grant told Mary that Hiram had been killed. In disbelief, she calmly responded, "It cannot be." But as she let him into the house, she fell back against the bureau and was placed in a chair. Later, after the bodies were cleaned up and lay in the mansion house, Mary took the children to see their father. When she reached her husband's body, she knelt down and clasped his head and turned his face to her. Finally, her sorrow burst out as she wailed, "Oh, Hiram, Hiram, have they shot you? Are you dead?" She drew him closer and kissed him as the children clung to her. Violence against the populace increased to the point that Brigham Young, now recognized as their leader, realized they would have to leave Nauvoo. He called for hastening the work on the temple, knowing that receiving the temple endowment would give the saints strength and a new dedication to the gospel to help them through the difficult time ahead. On December 10, 1845, Mercy and Mary were invited to come to the temple at 3:30 a.m. to help complete arrangements in the East Room where the endowment ordinance would be given. At 4:45 a.m., the administration of the endowment began. At that time, Mary received her endowment, and the next day, Mother Smith and Mercy got theirs. Mary and Mercy served in the temple for 3 weeks. Both of their young daughters, Mary Jane and Martha Ann, stayed in the temple with them. On January 15, 1846, Mary and Jerusha were sealed to Heber C. Kimball by proxy, along with several widows and unmarried women for time, including Mercy on the 23rd. Mary's children looked up to Heber, and he would be their protector after they arrived in Utah. From then on, Heber counseled Mary on both temporal and spiritual matters. In Salt Lake City, he baptized Martha Ann, whom she called my stepfather, and Mary often walked to the Kimball home to visit him and Valette. When released from her service in the temple, Mary struggled with the decision of whether to stay in Nauvoo or go west with the saints, or perhaps return to England. She also thought she might even stay in her comfortable home in Nauvoo. But she chose to leave the city with those who believed in the doctrines of the church and travel to a place far from the rabble-rousers in Nauvoo. She knew the truths of the gospel and wished that she and the children, including Hiram's by Jerusha, be raised with the saints. Her brother Joseph leaned toward staying. The crops had given a good yield and the orchards were bearing well. The problem centered mostly on the lack of means to finance the trip. Finally, they made the decision to leave, but they must sell properties, some of their livestock, their house, and most of the furnishings. Joseph Fielding sold his home and moved to the one on Mary's farm. As mentioned earlier, Hiram's holdings were valued at over $900. If the farm and their 2 houses could be sold, it would enable Mary to give Lavina her share of her father's estate, which she had requested. Through several submissions to the court in behalf of her children, Mary received enough to give Lavina and her husband $200 and put the rest toward traveling expenses. She also liquidated property Hiram had developed in Nauvoo for housing. and negotiated with several merchants in nearby towns to exchange property for wagons, oxen, horses, cows, and supplies. Mary's entourage numbered 18, which meant they needed more of everything than would be needed by smaller groups. She required at least 6 wagons and teams to transport 18 people. Years later, Martha Ann remembered their exit from Nauvoo and from their grandmother. We left our home just as it was, our furniture and also the fruit trees hanging full of rosy-cheeked peaches. We bid goodbye to the loved home that reminded us of our beloved father everywhere we turned. We bid goodbye to our dear old feeble grandmother. I can never forget the bitter tears she shed when she bid us goodbye for the last time in this life. On September 8, 1846, Mary and the children, driven by the mob, barely escaped before the city was destroyed. Mary had succeeded in getting provisions, bedding, wagons, ox teams, her husband's big white horse Sam, and a few other necessities loaded on a flatboat. They spent the night in their camp on the bank of the river, listening to the bombardment of the city of Nauvoo. On October 21st, they pulled into winter quarters, where they found Heber and Valette Kimball, who took them to a place he had reserved for them to pitch their tent and park the wagons. By now, the animals were run down because of lack of corn and hay during their travels. Mary had lost 2 good mares, several sheep, 1 team of horses, and 2 yokes of oxen. Lacking hay for feed, they sent the remaining horses to an island nearby where they could browse. Later, when they checked on them, they found most were in bad condition, so they were brought back to winter quarters and fed hay at some expense. But all was not well in winter quarters that winter for Mary. The old family horse, Sam, died. We buried him where he died, in the temporary shed, which had served him for a stable, and wept for him then as for a dear friend lost, Joseph recalled. He was a favorite riding and carriage horse of his father, a noble animal, powerful, kind, and gentle. It was another reminder that the father and husband was gone. In my study of women who traveled west in the Victorian era, many had a penchant for the study of nature. For some, the emigration became an extended field excursion. They took great delight in finding evidence of natural processes and in describing terrain, climate, flora, and fauna. Unusual cloud formations, freak thunderstorms, and impressive rock structures were recorded. As I've written about Mary's travels, I have been hampered by the lack of any personal viewpoints. Most of what I know about Mary was written by her son, her daughter, her brother, or gleaned from others traveling in the same company. The last copy of a letter which was written to Mercy, who left winter quarters before Mary did, was penned at Chimney Rock. Here, surely Mary would be odd enough to write about the scenery, but my hope was in vain. Instead, she expressed her need for sleep so she could arise early to fix breakfast. When Mary finally left on the last leg of her journey to the valley, she recalled, "A great part of our teams were made up of cows and young oxen that had not been broke. Some had been lost during the winter. This forced her to hitch 2 wagons together for lack of leaders and drivers. She told the company leader, Cornelius P. Lott, she had 7 wagons and 4 yoke of oxen, plus a number of cows and calves. He did not think she could make the journey and told her she would slow everyone down. But Mary, determined to go, told him she would not ask for help. And it was fortuitous that sometime later, sometime after they left winter quarters, John, the oldest son, who had gone ahead with the company to Utah, returned and joined the family for the final lap. On September 22nd, 1848, his 16th birthday, he drove 5 wagons down the big mountain east of Salt Lake City. It was dark long before he got into camp with the last wagon. On the way, one wheel of his wagon ran into a tree, which was about 15 inches through. He had to lie on his back and chop the tree with a dull axe before he could go further. Mary's biographer followed this quote with the statement, "John had been magnificent and merited the highest praise for bringing the wagons off Big Mountain without a crash and into the city before Brother Lot arrived. Mercy, a friend James Lawson, and her brother Joseph Fielding had plotted a lot for her on 2nd West and 2nd North in the 16th Ward. However, she wanted a farm where she could raise crops to feed her family and her beloved animals. And so a day after her arrival, Mary rode her horse to an area about 7 miles south of the city, where open land promised good soil for farming, and a creek and cold, clean springs of water to irrigate the land and provide drinking water for the family's use. And the creek later was known as Mill Creek. As soon as weather permitted, they moved to the property and set up their overland wagon and a tent for living quarters. They all worked to clear the land and begin construction of a home. Joseph and John, the men of the house, were soon making adobes out of clay found nearby. By the time Joseph reached age 11, the 2 buildings were completed: a real house with 1 big room and a sleeping area above it, and a good warm barn of rocks and a thatched roof for the livestock. And some of you may know that the restored house now stands in this is the place park. The last few years of her life was a time of joy. The beauty of the world that had eluded her during the trek west surrounded her and provided peace. She joyfully moved into a home she and her children had built themselves. She demonstrated her faith in the gospel and commitment to its teachings joyfully. Joseph recalled that when it was time for his mother to pay tithing on the potatoes they had raised, she chose only the finest of the crop. When they reached the tithing office, the clerk chided Mary for paying her allotment when she was so poor. He said others more well off than she even came to the office to get potatoes. But Mary asked if he would prevent her the joy of paying her tithing, and told him she needed the blessings that came from a full and honest tithe. Life was good. Her children now attended school. They will all worship together. They worked together. There were no mobs to hurt them, few worries for their safety. Her dreams were fulfilled. No longer did she separate herself from others, but attended ward functions and was known for quiet manner, alert mind, and cultivated speech. However, the hard life of crossing the plains and pioneering in the valley began to be evident in her features. Lines appeared in her forehead and round the corners of her mouth. Squint lines were noticeable near her eyes. Her hands showed thickening joints. She looked fatigued and in need of rest. As mentioned, she developed pneumonia. Her last wish was to be spared to care for her family, but her faith was not enough this time, and she passed away on September 21st, 1852, 8 years from the time she entered the valley. Martha, Ann, and Joseph grieved for her intensely. Joseph manifested his grief in ways unlike the kind, hard-working boy of the past. When the school teacher threatened to slap Martha Ann's hands for some infraction, Joseph beat him up. He seemed at loose ends, and finally church leaders sent him on a mission to Hawaii at a very young age. Martha Ann and the other children stayed with Hannah Grinnells until the lifelong family friend and helper died 2 years later. Then Martha Ann resided with her Aunt Mercy for a time, and finally with her brother John, who gave her a home until she married. Martha Ann later wrote, "To lose my dear mother at the tender age of 11 was a severe trial in my life. I felt I did not care to live longer. I was not old enough at my father's death to fully realize it as I did the loss of my mother. I felt that the world was blank." Hiram and Jerusha's children were taken in by relatives and lived full lives. John seemed most close to Mary of the children, and he missed her dearly. In his autobiography, he recorded, "The death of my mother," not stepmother, but mother. Writing to Joseph in 1856, he again referred to the death of our mother. Brigham Young appointed John as a guardian for the family, and thus he provided for them until they married. But it was Joseph who acted as a parent to his sister Martha Ann through his letters of encouragement and advice. In one letter written January 28, 1855, he told her, "The Lord will bless you, and you will grow up in the footsteps of your mother, and you will be blessed with everything, even as your mother was. Only be kind to your sisters and mind what they say, and do not get cross, and study your books. One more thing, never feel downhearted, but be merry in your heart, and joyful, and keep a prayerful hand and a thoughtful mind, and the Lord will bless you." Good advice that Mary would have approved of. In the Doctrine and Covenants, section 23, verse 3, Hiram is told, "Wherefore thy duty is unto the church forever, and this because of thy family." Many of Hiram and Jerusha's and Mary's family have been called to duty in the church, including Joseph F., president of the church from 1901 to 1918, Joseph Fielding, church president from 1970 to 1972, Florence Smith Jacobson, YWMIA president from 1961 to 1972, and church curator for many historic building restorations, and John, church patriarch from 1855 to 1911. The Smith family continues to serve faithfully, as did their progenitors. Thank you.
Do we have some questions for Audrey? And remember to stand up and just wait for the microphone so that we can get it on the recording.
Where is she buried?
She's buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
The Salt Lake City Cemetery?
Anyone else? Yes.
What was Mary's reaction to hiring Mercy?
Mercy? Well, I think she was glad because she knew that Mary was without a husband too. And being her sister, you know, they were close anyway, so, and the fact that he built a room separate from the rest of the household, I guess gave them some privacy. Okay? Yes?
How many children did Hiram and Jerusha have?
They had 9 children. No, wait a minute. They had 6 children. No, wait a minute. I'm wrong again. I'm counting in Joseph and Martha. They had Lavina, John, Jerusha, Sarah, and then there was a Mary that died before Mary Fielding married Hiram. Yes.
I've got to ask this question. Mary is the story about Mary and the ox. Did that really occur?
Mm-hmm. I decided not to tell that one because everybody knows it. That's the only thing I knew about Mary was the ox and what was the other one? Anyway, there were 2 stories I knew about her, and so I decided I would tell some new things, and you have access to Mary's story about the ox everywhere. Well, she had an ox who laid down and died, and she asked for if any of the brethren had some oil, and so some was found, and she asked 2 men to bless the ox, and it raised up and lived. Well, a little while later, another ox fell down and acted as if it was dead, and so they followed the same procedure again, and it too rose. And it was the faith of Mary and faith of the priesthood and all of the people around that I think were pulling for Mary and hoping for the best for her.
I have 2 questions. First of all, are you a descendant of Mary Fielding?
No.
Okay.
I'm just a historian. Well, I shouldn't say just. I am a historian.
Okay.
And I write about women a lot.
Second question, just quickly, there's a record in our family records, my wife's a descendant of Mary's, that talks about the occasion that when Mary died, Martha Ann saw a vision of her mother that she didn't have the ability to write, but that her brother Joseph F. wrote and recorded. Do you have any details of that account?
I don't. One of the things I decided not to do was, since there will be a lecture on both Martha Ann and Joseph Fielding, that I would not say too much about them. So I'm sorry, I don't have that information. Yes.
Yes, did Mary's brothers and sisters and parents stay faithful in the church? And did they all join the church?
No, the only ones that joined were Mercy and Joseph. And her parents stayed in England and died there. And two of her brothers, I think, were preachers like their father in the Methodist religion.
I have two questions. Do we assume that Mary Fielding had a wonderful relationship with Emma and Lucy Mack?
They weren't really close, but they were as close as, sister-in-laws, I guess, can be, that live some distance from each other. They weren't living right close together for most of the time.
And my second question is in regards to her little tiny house that she built with her family in Utah. Mm-hmm. And I understand that that little sleeping loft upstairs was often rented out to help pay
the rent.
Their living.
They
had so
make
little.
a little bit of money, yes.
And were Hiram's children, there were 4 living children, with her at that time in that little house?
Yes, they were all there.
With the boarders and wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were there
remarkable.
until she died, and then Mother Grinnell's lived there for a little while with them, and then when Mother Grinnell's died, then they went to various relatives.
Makes you pretty thankful for the houses we have today,
It
doesn't
does.
it?
And I think I don't know, Mary was really happy with her house, but she had lived in a large house in Nauvoo. And I think she just kind of liked having her cozy little house with her children about her. Well, thank you very much.